And on behalf of the U.S. Department of Education and the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz, I want to welcome you to Jazz Informance 2024. We are so thrilled to be able to host this event today and to have so many students, teachers, ed colleagues, friends, parents, mentors in our audience today. And we also know many are participating virtually around the world. So Jazz Informance takes place during April, which is also known as JAM, Jazz Appreciation Month. JAM. All right. Now, I also know I want to give a shout out for the students who've come today. Some of you have come by bus and metro and you got here early and probably had to miss some school time. So we're sorry about that. But we have students from St. Peter's School, from Washington Global School, and from Amadon Bowen School. Let's give it up for the schools. I'm also really grateful that today the president of the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz is here with us, Tom Carter. Tom, thank you for joining us today. And we're so happy that the U.S. Department of Education Deputy Secretary of Education is with us today, Cindy Marten, and she's here. Give her a big hello. And she'll be speaking to you a little bit later. We also have some stars on our stage, and some of them will be introduced a little bit later, but I have to let you know, we are so fortunate to have with us Sean Jones, who is an internationally acclaimed jazz trumpeter and recording artist, and he is going to make you fall in love with the trumpet today. I guarantee it. Let's give it up for Sean. He'll be out shortly. You know, the other thing I wanted to just mention to all of you today, the reason we're here is because of the importance of music and arts in our schools. And we've asked the students in the past, you know, what have you learned from jazz? And so today, in my remarks, I thought I wanted to quote one of our students and what he said about that. His name is Quinn Renkemper. And when we asked him the question, what have you learned about life from playing jazz? And this is what he said, I quote, "The most valuable lesson I learned from jazz was how to take a step back to listen. Nowadays, it seems to me that most people are stuck in their own thoughts, including me. Playing jazz is a freeing experience. When I play, it allows me to get out of my own head and to embrace all of the different sounds of music happening around me. Jazz encourages me to be influenced by other musicians and makes me not only a better musician, but a better person." Absolutely, Quinn. I love those comments. So, taking Quinn's advice, let's all just step back or sit back, kind of get out of our heads, and let the music that our musicians will play for you today inspire you. And at this time, my solo is over, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. J.B. Dyas, Vice President of Education and Curriculum Development for the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz. Dr. Dyas, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We're going to be talking a little bit more about jazz, and I'll be back up in a few minutes, but we thought we'd just go ahead and right out of the gate, hit some jazz. I'd like to introduce you to not only one of the best trumpet players on the scene today, but many people argue that he's one of the very best who ever play the trumpet. Without any further ado, please welcome the National Peer-to-Peer Jazz Quintet with our special guest, Sean Jones.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. How's everybody doing this afternoon? How's everybody doing this afternoon? Let's try that again. There we go. It's so great to be here. How about another hand for these amazing young people? The Herbie Hancock peer-to-peer ensemble. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, Secretary Marten, for having us. Thank you, Tom. And of course, thank you to my man, JB Dyas, for having us here. You ready for some more great music? All right. The first composition that you heard was a piece entitled Yes or No, written by the legendary NEA jazz master Wayne Shorter. And now we are going to get into the man himself, Herbie Hancock, and we're going to play this tune. Anybody ever heard of this tune before? Yeah? Couple people? All right, what's it called? Watermelon Man. Close. Close. Yes, Cantaloupe Island. That is what it's called, yes. So we're going to kick that out. You ready to groove with us? All right, here we go. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I also want to give some love to our host, Maureen Dowling. Thank you so much for everything that you've done. And now we'd like to bring up my man, the myth and the legend, Vice President of Education and Curriculum Development at the Herbie Hancock Institute, Mr. J.B. Dyas, Dr. J.B. Dyas. Let's give it up for him.
Please, one more time for Sean Jones. I'd like to just quickly introduce everyone in the group. You know these are all high school students, right? Except for our bassist, he's been held back. Actually, I'd like to start with him on bass. That's Mr. Ed Rybick. He's the Director of Jazz Studies at Baltimore School for the Arts. We're two of these students. So one of the things that we do at the Herbie Hancock Institute is we make sure that all our students get to play with pros like Mr. Rybick and like Mr. Jones. So the two students from his school, Baltimore School for the Arts, on alto saxophone, please welcome Quinn Raykemper. And on the drums, Julian Frazier. And from the LaGuardia High School for Music and Art and Performing Arts in New York, please welcome Ben Sherman on the tenor saxophone. And right here from Washington, D.C., from the Duke Ellington School for the Arts, Jose Andre on the piano. Without any further ado, it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome to the stage Deputy Secretary Cindy Marten.
Hello, everybody. What a way to start an event. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Dyas. I'm very impressed. You have all the students' names down, their schools. You know what you're doing. What a leader. Thank you for your passion. And it's not just for an event, it's your decades-long dedication to this work, to teaching, and to mentoring student musicians in a way that we can all be inspired by what you've done and what you continue to do. And it's very admirable. So thank you, Dr. Dyas, for guiding and supporting so many students. It's teachers like you who help unlock the genius that lives within inside so many of our students and see the musical gifts and talents that they have and bring it to the stage like this for us to all enjoy. So how about give it up for our extraordinary, talented students for sharing your musical gifts. And I know Sean Jones just stepped back for a second, but to Sean Jones, let's give him another round of applause. Thank you. There he is, there he is. Thank you for joining us today. It's so important to be all together in one space like this as an internationally acclaimed performer right here on this stage, working with our students. Being able to be with a performer and a composer and having a professional play right alongside you, we appreciate what Sean does to be able to come here. And his schedule's crazy. He's very much in demand. He's very busy, and yet he found time to be here with our students. So he's not only does he perform and is well known within his field, he actually has a real job. Beyond that, he's chair of jazz studies at Peabody Conservatory of Music and artistic director of Carnegie Hall's National Youth Jazz Orchestra. That's a lot he's got going on, and he's here. So it's all the more telling of his commitment to our nation's youth that he would come here and be with our students right here on this stage. So thank you, Sean, for doing that. I want to talk to he's still back there talking to me. I can hear him. To all the students here. Now they know your whole bio. Exactly. Well, we know who we work for. It's our students, and you've just put a bright spotlight on their work. Let's talk about our students. Those of you here today and students across the country. As the Deputy Secretary of Education, I have been granted a tremendous and memorable opportunity, but my very favorite days in all of my career are those that are spent with our students. in schools, in classrooms, in spaces like this, and with our teachers. Opportunities like today, where we get to be with the young people who we serve and care most about. So I want to give a shout out to Ed, our teacher over here, Ed Rybeck. As a lifelong teacher, this is my 34th year in education, and I spent 17 years in the classroom, and I just love watching you as a teacher be here with your students. As a director of studies at Baltimore School for the Arts, I know you have returned a few times to play at our annual Jazz Informance, and we really appreciate you doing that. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's joined us here today in person and virtually. I'm looking at the camera, wherever that might be, all of the people online that are part of us. Especially, I want to welcome and thank Tom Carter, the president of the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz, sitting here in the front row. Department of Education looks forward to collaborating with the Institute for the annual Jazz Informance every year. It's so great to have this partnership with you, and we're grateful to have so many free music education programs that you offer to students, because you do what matters. You foster the next generation of jazz musicians in such a powerful way. So thank you for that. When I look into the audience, I see my favorites. I see all of the students and educators from the local schools right here in the Washington, D.C. area. We're so glad that you could be with us here in person today. Welcome. Here at the Department of Education, we believe in our bones and everything that we know to be true, that the arts and music education are critical. They are so important, not only to a well-rounded education, but they help to enrich our lives. We transform our lives through the arts and our robust arts education. So we're so happy, students, that you could be here with us today at this event, and you can learn about jazz and bring this into your life and understand the importance and the meaning. You remind us that the work that we do at the department every single day matters, because we can see it firsthand, how it makes a positive difference in your lives and your ability to live your dreams. So today we're going to get to see this incredible musicians. We're going to hear some amazing jazz music that I know is going to inspire you and fill your souls. How did the people here today become such talented musicians? Did that just happen because they dreamed it and wished it into being? No, they practiced, they persisted. They have that kind of perseverance where they're committed to the art. And they worked with their teachers who kept raising the bar, meaning they continually figured out ways to gain more knowledge and to master more challenging content. As soon as they learned one thing, then they got the next best challenge and the next best challenge. That's how they raise the bar with the support of their educators. And each time they do it, they go up to the next level. And guess what? They don't stop. As soon as you achieve mastery on one piece or one art form, you keep going, which is a sign of an ongoing lifelong learner. They keep challenging themselves every day to get better, to improve, and to bring their art form into great spaces like this. Likewise, the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz has been raising the bar in music education in public schools throughout the country. Through the department's Raise the Bar, Lead the World initiative at the Department of Education, we are focused on raising the bar. We can and we must raise the bar for academic excellence for every student in all subjects across the country, and that includes music and the arts. I will humbly submit, from my 34 years of experience, you do not achieve excellence in education without music and the arts being intentionally designed and embedded. There is no other way to do it without arts education, intentionally designed, embedded, and invested in to our nation's schools. That is how we raise the bar, and that is how we improve learning conditions for each and every student, because all young children, all young learners deserve a high quality, comprehensive, rigorous, and well-rounded education. Raising the bar is also about finding the ways to push the limits. And so when we push limits, we maximize our potential, the potential that lies within each of us as learners, and the potentials of our communities and of our nation, because we raise the bar together and we keep pushing. And I think maybe Herbie Hancock said it best. Life is not about finding your limitations. It's about finding your infinity. Playing jazz has allowed the musicians right here today with us to find their infinity. And we can be inspired by that work as they keep pushing for their own excellence. So I want to close now by telling you about one of our dear colleagues from the Department of Education. We recently lost her earlier this year when Melissa Apostolides, who was our director of the writing division in our own Office of Communications and Outreach, she tragically passed away. And her passing has left a huge hole in the hearts of so many of us here at the Department of Education and all of the places and spaces where people knew her. Melissa served at the Department of Education for more than 32 years. That's service. And she was universally admired for her intelligence, for her kindness, and for so many other really beautiful qualities. What she did was she helped illuminate our work, both internally and externally. She helped to expand the opportunities in career and technical education. She found ways to always honor talented students because she worked on our Presidential Scholars Program. She also shaped all of our external messaging for so many education secretaries and senior officials to help them connect to educators and students and families, and to help our story reach the hearts and the minds of the American people through her talented writing. She helped the country understand the department's mission as a talented writer who cared so much about the youth and had a particular joy for arts and education. In so many ways, we all know that Melissa's work as a writer and as a creator, it was art. Writing is an art form, being able to communicate and inspire people. A lot like jazz. It's an art form, and it connects people. It helps them to hear a story and to feel it as if they were there. That's what a great writer can do. That's what music can do. So, not surprisingly, because of who she was and the artist that she was, she loved this event. She loved the jazz Informance. I'm looking at her husband in the front as he's nodding his head that she certainly did. She loved everything that it stood for. So I can't think of a better way to honor Melissa by hosting today's event in her sacred memory. We welcome her family, her friends, and her colleagues who are here to celebrate the power of music as well as the power of the written word to educate, to move people. Nick, would you please stand so we can all recognize you? A way to honor her. So thank you all for being here. We're going to enjoy some incredible music, and as a point of personal privilege, I want to say thank you to one more person. I don't know where she is. Melissa Velez Anderson. Michelle. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said Michelle Velez Anderson. Little birdie told me that none of this happens without you. So great thanks to Maureen and her entire team, but Michelle, thank you for what you do behind the scenes to make all of this happen. You make it look like magic, but it's not. It's hard work. And my final point of privilege is what an honor it is to serve in this administration. And I moved far away. I used to live in San Diego where I was an educator for 32 years. And I moved here to serve in this administration, and it's a high honor. But I had to move very, very far away from the people that I love. And I want to let you all know that my mother, Fern Siegel's birthday is tomorrow, and she's right here in the front row. This is her first time visiting me in DC to see what it's like and what my work is here in Washington, DC, so she can get a little flavor. And I couldn't think of something more amazing to show her a little slice of what we do here at the department. So thanks for being here, Mom, and thank you for helping us honor your wife. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful day of celebration, remembrance, and just love. I have to say that, yes, it is Aries season, and my mom's birthday is tomorrow. Happy birthday. This is absolutely wonderful. And we couldn't have a jazz concert without, number one, playing some blues and playing some bebop. So we're going to do both of those simultaneously, and we're going to play a Charlie Parker composition entitled Billy's Bounce. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much. And we'd like to bring back Dr. J.B. Dyas. Let's give him a round of applause as he comes up to the stage. Dr. J.B. Dyas.
Thank you very much. One more time for Sean Jones and this amazing peer-to-peer jazz quintet. So, we're going to talk a little bit about how jazz works, what these students do to do what they do. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you that the two most important things about jazz are, one, it's America's music. It was born in this country. Now, of course, today jazz is played all over the world, but it started here a little over 100 years ago in New Orleans. And now, of course, jazz is played on every continent, including Antarctica. It's even played in outer space. I have it in good authority that they're listening to Herbie Hancock and Charlie Parker on the space station. So it truly is a universal music. The second thing is, equally important, is the most important element is improvisation. Improvisation, that means the students are composing, the musicians are composing what they are playing as they are playing. It's spontaneous composition. About 90% of what you hear at every jazz concert has never been played that way before, and it'll never be played that way again. So we learn how to improvise, which is different than classical music, right? In classical music, you read the music that the composer wrote, you play it the way the conductor tells you, fast, loud, but in jazz, we play it the way we want to play it. That's also the reason why jazz is such a perfect example of America. America's music, jazz is a perfect example of democracy because it's individual freedom, but with responsibility to the group. Individual freedom, but with responsibility to the group. So we're going to show you now how a jazz tune is put together. Now this is a famous jazz tune called Blue Bossa, written by a famous jazz trumpet player by the name of Kenny Dorham. And what you notice here, that these are called bar lines right here. There's a bar line here and a bar line here and here and here. And they separate the music into measures. And there's 4 beats in every measure. So if you're tapping your feet along with the music, you're going to go like this. You're going to go, let me see if we can get this working. Here we are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you'll notice there's 16 measures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Now, this right here is the melody of the tune. And these right here, see that C minor and F minor, that little dash means minor. These are called chord symbols, and they tell the pianist, well, they tell everybody what to play, because this is what the pianist is playing, the bass player knows what the piano player is playing, and the horn players have to know what the piano player is playing, because they have to improvise a solo that fits with those chords. So this is the melody that Kenny Dorham wrote. Now look down here. Here are those same chord symbols again. See how it's C minor for the first 2 measures here? C minor for the first 2 measures down here. F minor for the measures 3 and 4 down here. F minor here. Same thing for the rest of it. But notice there's music written up here, but there's no music written down here. It's blank. And the reason why it's blank is because the music hasn't been written yet. It gets written as they play it. Spontaneous composition. So here's how it works. Every time they go through these chords, and when you do a jazz performance, every tune has got a set of chords. We just call that a chord progression of chords. And every time they go through that set of chords, and they're going to go through it many times, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 10 times, 20 times, 50 times, however many times they want. And the reason why it doesn't get boring is because every time they go through it, something else, something new happens, and the audience doesn't know what's going to happen next because the musicians don't know what's going to happen next. It's just like conversation. You don't know what to say till you say something. And then you don't know what to say till you answer back. And then maybe you'll come into the conversation and the whole topic will change. And you'll come into the conversation and heat the whole thing up. And you'll have to come into the conversation and cool it all out. And you're using music or using words to communicate how you're feeling at the moment. Jazz musicians do the same thing, but they use music to communicate how they're feeling at the moment. So here's what happens. Every time we go through that set of chords, it's called a chorus. A chorus. So one chorus, then the second time through, the second chorus, then the third chorus, and the fourth chorus. Well, the first chorus, we play the melody that was written by the composer, in this case, Kenny Dorham. Then the second chorus, we might repeat that melody, but we're not going to do it the same. We might harmonize it. But notice there's no harmony written there. They're going to do the harmony by ear and their knowledge of music theory. Knowing music theory is like knowing English grammar or Spanish grammar or French grammar or music grammar, music theory. Then, after we play the melody, which we call the head, jazz musicians have their own lingo for everything. We call the melody the head. You know, I've been a professional musician since I've been 15 years old. And in all those times, never once have I gone to my job with my instrument to make some money by playing some toe-tapping music with the other fellows. But you go to your gig with your axe, make some bread, playing a killing set with the other cats. So we call the melody of the tune, the one originally written in this case by Kenny Dorham, we call it the head. So we play the head twice, then everybody solos, improvises over those same set of chords, but they have to learn those chords first. So let me make sure you know what I mean by a chord. A chord is just more than one note played at the same time. So here's 3 separate notes. And if you play them all at the same time, that's a chord. And here are 4 separate notes. And that's a minor 7th chord. That's C minor 7th. And here's F minor 7th. And then D half diminished, G7 altered, and C minor, and E flat minor, A flat 7, D flat major, D half diminished, G7 altered, C minor, and then a fast, D half diminished, G7 altered, C minor. Those are the chords in the tune. Now, besides just playing the basic 3 or 4 notes that are in the chord, the pianist can add more notes to the chord however he wants to make it sound hipper, to make it sound more like jazz. So here's a regular C minor chord. And we're going to put the bass in the chord too. The bass player will play the root of that chord to give it more body. Here's the regular chord again, and with the bass. Here that gives it more body. And here's an F minor with the bass. And D half diminished, G7 altered, and C minor, and so forth. Now, besides those basic chords, the pianist can play jazz chords. So here's that regular C minor, the way it's written again. And here's a jazz version of the same chord. Hear the difference? Here's the basic way again. And here's a jazz version. And here's another jazz version of the same chord. And another one. And Jose knows dozens of ways to play that chord, and he might just make up a few as he goes along as well. So now the horn players, they have to learn the notes that are in the chord. So the first thing that horn players do when they're learning a song is they just learn the roots of the chords. So they'll play C for 2 measures, F for 2 measures, then D, G, C. Let's demonstrate that. These are just the roots of the chords. A 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. E flat. Good. Now the next thing they have to learn are the notes that are in the chords. Now they can only play one note at a time, so they play them one note at a time, and we call that arpeggios. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now they know the chords. Now every chord has got a scale that goes with it. Now they learn the scales that go with the chords. A 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that they've all learned the chords and the scales, now they can mix up those notes any way they want to improvise. So let's do that. Let's have each of you take one chorus using what you just learned, but putting it in your own way. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's Quinn. And that's Ben Sherman. And now let's see what Jose comes up with. And that's how you improvise. Now, of course, the most important thing in jazz are the solos. But of course, we have to have the head played well too. You know, when International Jazz Day, which the Herbie Hancock Institute sponsors every year, every April 30th, we always do our all-star global concert in a different country. And this year, we're going to Tangier in just a couple of weeks. But 9 years ago, we were in Paris for International Jazz Day. And I was so excited because I'd never been to Paris and I wanted to go see the Mona Lisa at the Louvre. And you stand in line, you finally get up there, you get to look for a minute, and then they move you on. And I was noticing, of course, it was exquisite. The painting was exquisite. And as I left, as I was leaving, I noticed and I saw, boy, the Mona Lisa was in a beautiful frame. Beautiful frame. They must have spent $5,000 for the frame. Now, of course, the painting itself is invaluable. But of course, you have to have a good frame for the Mona Lisa. You can't just thumbtack her to the wall. So there's a beautiful frame. Have to have it, has to be good. But nobody stood in line for 2 hours to see the frame. They wanted to see what was in the frame. So in jazz, we play the head, we want to play it good, and it surrounds the solo. So we play the head at the beginning, we play the head at the end, that's the melody, and then all the good stuff is in the middle. So it's just like a sandwich. Think of jazz like a sandwich. You got one piece of bread at the top. That's the first time they play the head. You got the piece of bread at the bottom. That's when they play the head at the end. And just like in a sandwich, all the delicious stuff is in the middle. Cool. Okay, so let's, and we can play this tune in different ways. Let's make sure we know the melody. Let's just play the melody, guys. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the melody that Kenny Dorham wrote. Now I'm going to say Quinn, let's do it again, but Quinn harmonized the melody. Their knowledge of chords, their knowledge of music theory, and their ear. Good. Okay, so now we have to decide what groove we're going to play. So let's play a little bit just as a bossa nova. 1, because that's the original, blue bossa, bossa nova. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Okay, let's do it as a swing. A 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3. How about as a samba? How about we do today's hip hop funk groove? Great. So we got the groove, we know the chords, we know the scales, we know the head, we can harmonize the head. So now we just say, let's play the tune and see what happens. So please welcome Sean Jones back to the stage. And the only thing that I'm going to say is, why don't we start off with bass as an introduction? And that's how jazz works. Give it up one more time. Before playing our last tune, we have time to answer some questions from you folks, if you have any, for either Mr. Jones or any of the students. Do we have any questions today? There's a microphone right over there. If you have a question, I see somebody making their way over. Go right ahead.
How did you become so good at playing your instruments?
The question is how'd you get so good at playing your instruments? Why don't we start right here with Quinn, and why don't everybody have their answer to that?
Hello, great question.
My name is Quinn.
Yep, my name is Quinn Raykemper. I'm a. My name is Quinn Raykemper. I'm a senior at Baltimore School for the Arts. I'm recently 18. My birthday was on Monday, so it is Aries season. It's a birthday week. How did I get so good at playing? Well, I love listening to jazz, and I spend so much time with the music that even when I'm not physically with my instrument, I'm still taking things in and getting new ideas. And then when I'm in the practice room, which I practice around 2 hours a day, I try to, but it doesn't feel like it. When I'm playing, it goes by really fast. If you're focused and you know what you're going to work on, it goes by in a breeze. And I use that time to work on all the things that I hear and all the things that I feel. And really just it's how often that you do it, not how much. If you practice, 10 hours a day, once a week, you're going to lose all that stuff throughout the rest of the week. And so I try and play at least every day to keep it going, to keep myself going. And I've been doing it for 6 years so far, and I love it, and I'm going to keep doing it.
Hi, my name is Ben Sherman. I am 17 years old. I go to LaGuardia High School. I'm a junior.
Closer to the mic.
Sorry. To add on to Quinn, I believe this music is an art form, and it requires a lot of discipline, because in this music, in my opinion, you are forever a student. So it's not about getting good or getting to a particular level. It's about how can I look at this from a student perspective as like I'm just learning this for the first time, and you get so much more out of listening and so much more out of playing with other people when you just like be selfless. That's a big thing, just being selfless, and you'll grow so much more and taking everything that you do in the music very seriously. That's how you grow. And I guess you could say that's how you get good, but you know.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? Well, I didn't hear you at all. How are you doing today? That's what I like to hear. That's what I'm talking about. My name is Jose Andre, and I play piano. It is such a pleasure and an honor for me to be here playing at this incredible Informance with such a wonderful, wonderful group of brothers, friends, and musicians. Let's give it up for the National Peer-to-Peer Jazz Sextet. Well, first of all, I hope you've been enjoying the music so far. And yeah, have you been enjoying the music so far? Awesome, awesome. Well, we got one more tune that we're gonna play in a few minutes. But to answer your question, I love playing my instrument because I feel that music is my passion. I really love jazz, especially because it allows me to improvise and play whatever is in my heart at the moment. And to have fun with the rest of the group in the bandstand is such an amazing thing to do because it brings you a lot of energy, and it also it is really exciting for me. Whenever I sit down and play the piano, something changes on me. And that's why I love listening all the time. And of course, I play the instrument to practice, but it's mainly listening and knowing who you are as a person. Smile every day. So, yeah. Well, I hope you enjoy the music once again. I'm Jose Andre, and I'll pass along to my friend Julian on drums. Thank you so much for coming out.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Julian Frazier. I'm also a senior at Baltimore School for the Arts. To answer your question, how do you get so good? I think for me, motivation and passion is really the main two things. And then just time. You just gotta wait and keep practicing good. Don't, like Quinn was saying, don't spend 10 hours a day or 10 hours in one week and then the rest of the week not do anything. I think consistent practice and good practice throughout the week is the best thing to do. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. How about you, Ed? Tell us a little bit how you got started and why you still do this.
All right. My name is Ed Rybick. I'm the jazz director at the Baltimore School for the Arts, also an alumni of the school. I'm very happy to be in the situation that I am, working with these fabulous young students. And I have to say, while I have the microphone, thank you to the Herbie Hancock Institute. Thank you, JB. Thank you, Tom, for all you do for all the students here and all the students around the country, but especially my students at Baltimore School for the Arts. You guys have been such a huge help. And this past year, if y'all didn't all know this, we've kind of partnered with the Herbie Hancock Institute a little bit more, and we've been able to supply one workshop every week. That's 4 workshops a month at no cost to the school. It's been incredible. It's not only helped my students who are in the jazz program, but it's helped my students who are not in the jazz program to get into the jazz program. So we're feeding this program, we're growing this program, and it's going to be growing for years to come. To answer your question, young man, how do you get good at your instrument? How do you get so good at your instrument? It's kind of the same way you get good at anything. Time, dedication, focus. If I was baking a cake, the first time I baked a cake, I might not get it right the first time. Maybe I put too many eggs in or something. I learned from that, and I got better at making that cake. The first time I picked up a bass for the first year, I don't think I played anything except for open strings. I didn't use my other hand. So dedication, consistency, focus, and time. That's the answer.
And what about you, Sean? What's your story?
Well, now I'm hungry, man. You're talking about cakes. See, he's in shape. I'm in a shape. So, in addition to what everyone has said, you got to believe in it. You got to believe in it. And for me, the first time I heard the music, I felt like I belonged. The first time I heard it, I said, "Oh wow, this is the place that I want to live in." And no matter how difficult it ever got, or how challenging various times were, or when the self-doubt would come in, all of that stuff subsided whenever I would put on an album, or I would be with some of my friends and we would play together. So a sense of belonging, and a sense that this is really truly what I'm supposed to be doing. You have to believe in what you're doing, otherwise it won't work. If you mind, I'd like to share a quick story about a vampire. So there was a vampire that was going around this guy's house, and he was chasing the guy up and down the stairs. Finally trapped the guy up against the wall. And so the guy is like standing there afraid, frightened. And he's thinking to himself, well, I don't have any garlic in my pocket. That kills vampires. It's midnight, so there's no sun out. And then he saw on the corner of the wall a cross. He says, oh, vampires are afraid of crosses. And so he reached out and grabbed the cross real quick and put it in front of the vampire. Vampire backed up. Then he looked at the guy, looked at the cross, and started laughing and crushed the cross in his hands. And the vampire starts to move in again for the kill. And the guy says, time out, Mr. Vampire. I got to get my whistling together. Time out, Mr. Vampire. Please tell me, why didn't this cross kill you? And the vampire said, silly man, you got to believe in that thing in order for it to work. So anything that you do in your life, no matter how much time you put in it or how much money you put in it, if you don't believe in it and you don't stick to it, it will not work. So stick to it and believe.
Sean Jones, the National Peer-to-Peer Quintet. It's my great pleasure now to bring... Oh, go right ahead.
Why do you guys play jazz and not any other kinds of music?
Why do you play jazz? That's a good question, because most kids their age are mostly into rock or hip hop or something else. So why do you play this music?
I specifically play this music because I feel I have a deeper purpose and, like Mr. Jones said, a sense of belonging within the community. I feel like this music creates community, and I feel like, yes, other genres do that, but not to the extent of where, like Mr. Dyas was saying, of a democracy. You know, there's freedom within the parameters, or freedom within the frame or the structure of what we're doing. And I feel like, you know, this music is also born out of black struggle, and that is also very important to my heritage as well. And I feel like it means something. So that's why I play it.
It's individual. It's personal to every person that plays it, just to them. If you're lucky, it'll mean something to someone else, but it touches every person who plays it on a deep level. And actually, I want to say I do play all the other kinds of music, but I keep coming back to this one because of that. It creates community, but it's your own voice that you get to make and you get to play for other people. It's great to be here and play for all of you. So yeah, that's why I play it, because it's my own creation, but then I get to share it with everyone else and hear everyone else's voice. So yeah, really beautiful.
Well, what a great question. And like I was saying in the previous question, I love this genre of music because you have freedom to interact with people and interact with the musicians, but also to listen to each other, listening to your heart. And that's why jazz is one of my favorite genres to play, and that's my passion. I love this genre because it allows you to really be yourself in any circumstance, in really any circumstance. And that's why I believe that if you have a passion for something, it doesn't have to be necessarily jazz. It could be other kinds of music, or even sports, or bake cakes. Yeah, I mean, if you got any passions for something that really calls you, you can definitely do it as long as it's from the bottom of your heart. And that's how jazz really worked for me, because I can definitely express myself and play with other musicians and friends while having a good time. So, yeah.
For me, it just, I don't know, I like doing what I want, and I feel like jazz is the perfect genre to do what I want. It's also hard, and it's not like, not to take anything away from the other genres, but it was harder for me to really wrap my head around at first, and I like that challenge. So that's what keeps me going, because I'll never fully get it, but to even try is the best thing for me. So being able to do whatever I want, and also being able to interact with new things all the time. I don't like repetition, and I like doing new things every time. So that's why I keep coming back.
I'm in the same boat as Quinn. I play all sorts of music, but I am the director of jazz studies at Baltimore School for the Arts. So we don't exactly spend a lot of time playing Bob Marley or Willie Nelson, you know? So, although he has stand. But jazz, like a lot of the students here said, it's a challenge. It's cultural. It's American. It's really, yeah, it's really one of the true American art forms, and it's for everybody. It's it's about sharing. It's about being your own person, having your own voice, but as JB always says, with respect to the group. And so it teaches respect, it teaches individuality, and it teaches dedication and just passion, like Jose said, just coming from the bottom of your heart, belief, like Sean said. It's all of that. But you know what? It's real fun. So I just love playing all sorts of music. Any music I can get my hands on, I'm happy to do it. So if you love something, don't stop.
You know, the only thing that I would add is that jazz is like an umbrella. I have my own personal definition of jazz, and that is that jazz is the sonic, or the sophisticated sonic representation of American culture. If you say that, then you realize that jazz is hip hop. Jazz is also classical music. It's also country western and everything in between. It's an umbrella. So the way that I look at jazz is kind of the menu. And each subset of the American genre is the specific thing that you choose to eat that day. Right? We all have our favorite restaurants. And so when I go to a certain restaurant that I love, it just happens to be this restaurant in Baltimore called Wicked Sisters. Big menu, right? That's jazz. But sometimes I want some salad. Sometimes I want a couple appetizers. Sometimes I want something heftier. Sometimes I just want dessert. Jazz is all of those things and everything else in between. All right? That's why I love it.
Great, great question, great answers. Now I'd like to bring up the U.S. Department of Education General Counsel, top lawyer at the department. Please welcome Phil Rosenfeld.
So thank you, Dr. Diaz, and it's a great pleasure to be here every year. This is my favorite event at the department, and I love a lot of what we do, but this stands out. And I know Melissa always said to me, this is her favorite event. And it's great that we can honor her memory today. I've been coming every year now. We've been doing this for around 10 years or so with talented high school musicians, great professional musicians like Sean Jones, and a gifted educator, Dr. Dyas. He teaches us the lessons and the magic of jazz. And as was said, jazz is native to America, but it's loved all over the world. It teaches us about democracy, ingenuity, leadership, resilience, America, togetherness. It is all those things. It's a beacon of hope and liberty for people around the world. In the last few years, the teamwork of jazz and its creativity got us through challenges like COVID-19, and it has helped people around the world weather their storms and their challenges. We've seen it in the Ukraine, we've seen it in lots of different countries, where it's the things that people come back to when they need to relax and get away from their troubles. I first went to the first Jazz Informance, and I wasn't going to go in. I'm a rock and roll guy, and was a rock and roll critic back some years ago. And I tried jazz, and it just didn't kind of catch for me. But as I was walking by the auditorium, I heard the music, and it clicked. It was like a high-powered magnet. I was immediately drawn in, and ever since, I have been converted to learning more and more about jazz. I haven't given up rock and roll. I still go to a lot of concerts and play and all that stuff. But it took me out of my comfort zone and built a different kind of way of looking at the world. This year, I became very interested in artificial intelligence, its possibilities, its risks, how it might help us do our jobs and our lives better. And I realized that in a few areas, it'll never replace the real thing. Jazz is one of them, and good teaching is another. With jazz, you have the teamwork, the collaboration. It's about listening to each other, as we've been hearing today, communicating in new ways, creating new music right before your eyes. That's not something AI can do. Great teaching is similar. It's about creating. It's about moving your students to new places. It's showing them the world in different eyes, getting them out of their comfort zone to explore. The power of jazz and the power of good teaching is all around us. Each year when I prepare for the Jazz Informants, I read Herbie Hancock's autobiography, and he talks about how he was playing with Miles Davis, and he made a mistake, and he felt really bad about it, and he looked up at Miles Davis, and Miles just played on, created a new bit of music, possibly better than what was intended. And I've gone back to that concert, and I've tried to find that mistake, and I never could. It's always there. It's always learning from mistakes, picking up, being resilient, creating something anew. That's the magic of jazz, and it's the magic of good teaching. Jazz is vibrant, ever evolving, same like good teaching. It's adaptability. Musicians adapting to different styles, rhythms, harmonies, situations, different audiences. That's what effective teaching is about. Adaptability, evaluating what works for your individual students, shifting what you need to do to teach them in a way that resonates with them. It's about empathy, Jazz musicians express their emotions through their instruments. Teachers emphasize with all of their students, putting themselves in the student's shoes, addressing root issues, supporting their learning emotionally and academically. It's about collaboration. That's what is central to jazz, and it's central to great teaching. Working with colleagues, families, students together to teach the student well. It's of course about creativity, improvisation, created on the spot as Dr. Dyas showed us, and that's what creative teaching is about. Designing engaging lessons that could change on the spot to deal with the students and how they're learning. It's lifelong learning. Jazz constantly evolves. Herbie Hancock is a great example. He has done so many different styles of music. Teachers are the same way. Lifelong learning, professional development, always updating, always newly creating, growth, curiosity. It's about patience, practicing, as the student said. It takes time, it takes focus, and takes attention. Teaching is like that too. Being patient in learning, being patient with your students, understanding that learning takes time. And it's about respect. Jazz musicians honor each other's contributions. We see it in the way the students played, and they value diversity, different viewpoints, and that was good teaching as well. Respectful teachers appreciate their students' backgrounds, perspectives, and abilities. They create an inclusive classroom. Good jazz and good teaching involve all of these things. Every good jazz musician and every good teacher are examples of that. And I'm going to end with the poem, and want you to listen, and then I have a question for you. In the rhythm of jazz, let's explore the class where teaching and notes intertwined oh so vast. From the ivory keys to the sax sweet wail, education grooves like a sympathetic tale. Jazz and teaching, sharing secrets oh so sly, how jazz bridges realms reaching for the sky. Collaboration blooms, harmonies entwine in classrooms where melodies, hearts, and minds align. Students sway to the beat of knowledge's flow. Their steps syncopated, improvisations grow. From chords to equations, they dance and they affirm. Jazz and education, how it makes hearts and minds learn. And I want to ask if you know who might have written that. Anybody want to guess? Yes? I'm sorry? So it was a collaboration. It was AI and me together. So thank you very much. And thanks for listening and being part of the program.
Thank you so much, everybody. How about another hand for this amazing group, the Herbie Hancock Peer-to-Peer Ensemble. Thank you to everyone that was a part of making this event so special. Your love and your energy is felt on this stage, and we thank you, and we look forward to the next time. And now we're going to end with a song by a trumpeter. One of my favorite, if not my favorite trumpeter. His name is Dizzy Gillespie, and we hope that you enjoy his iconic composition, A Night in Tunisia. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon. Please remember, jazz is the greatest representation of democracy because it allows for individual freedom but respect to the group. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Herbie Hancock Institute.
Ladies and gentlemen, and students and teachers and leaders, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's give it up one more time for the student musicians, for Sean Jones, for the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz, for Dr. J.B. Dyas, and all our special guests. We're so glad you could join us today. And I hope you go home and listen to some more jazz.